Hello and welcome to this video on Roman numerals and figured bass. At this point, if you've not watched the lesson on the introduction to the Roman numerals and figured bass, I would encourage you to watch that video now, as these lessons are intended to be viewed in sequence. In this lesson, we are going to look at several examples of applying Roman numerals and figured bass to chords with open spacing. Before we start to analyze it, let's take a second to listen to what this example would sound like. The first step towards analyzing these chords using the Roman numerals and figured bass notation is to determine what key we are in. In a later video, I will explain how to determine whether we are looking at something that is in a major or minor key, but for now we are going to assume that the examples are in major keys. With that in mind, we can look at our key signature of 1 sharp and determine that we are in the key of G major. As you are getting started, you might find it helpful to write out the scale with the scale degrees. As we are just getting started, our first step when identifying chords in open spacing should be to rewrite the notes into root position. So if we look at our first example and write them into a root position triad, we can see that we have the notes G, B, and D, with the G as the root. If we look at our scale, we can see that G is the first scale degree, so that we can write an uppercase Roman numeral 1. A quick look at the bass note shows us that it is a G, which is also the root, meaning that we are in root position. Therefore, we can leave the figured bass notation blank. Looking at the notes in the second example, we can see that we have a B, a D, and an F sharp. A quick look shows us that this is the third scale degree, and that is a minor chord. So we can go down and write a lowercase Roman numeral 3 to represent this. A quick look at the bass note shows us that B is the bass note, meaning that since B is the root, this is also a root position chord. Moving forward with the next example, we can see that we have the notes E, G, and B. So if we write those out as a root position triad, we can see that E is the root. Looking at our scale, we can see that E is the 6th scale degree, and that is a minor chord. So we can write the lowercase Roman numeral 6 to represent this. A look at the bass note of G shows us that that is the third, meaning that we're in first position. So we can use the figured bass number of 6 to represent this. With the next example, we have the notes C, E, and G, with C being the root. If we look at our scale, we can see that C is the 4th scale degree, meaning that we can write the Roman numeral, uppercase Roman numeral 4 to represent this. Since the bass note is the C, which is also the root, we do not have to write any figured bass for a root position triad. Our next example has us looking at a chord with the notes A, C, and E, with A being the root. If we look at our scale, we can see that A is the 2nd scale degree, so we can write a lowercase Roman numeral 2 to represent this minor chord. Since the bass is the C, which is the 3rd, we can write the figured bass number of 6 to represent this. The next chord contains the notes D, F sharp, and A, with D being the root of the chord. If we look at our scale, we can see that D is the 5th scale degree, meaning that we can write an uppercase Roman numeral 5 to represent this. Since D is the bottom or bass note and the root, we can leave the figured bass notation blank. The next chord is very similar, but with one key difference. This chord contains the notes D, F sharp, and remember that F is sharp because of the key signature, an A, and a C. If we examine the intervals contained within the chord, we will see that there is a major 3rd from the root, a perfect 5th from the root, and a minor 7th from the root, meaning that we are dealing with a dominant 7th chord. Since D is the root of this chord, if we look at our scale, we can see that D is the 5th scale degree. So we can write an uppercase Roman numeral 5. Since D is the root and is also the bass note, we can write the figured bass number of 7 to represent that it is a dominant 7th chord in root position. The final example contains the notes of G and B. However, you notice that it is missing a third distinct note. Sometimes the 5th of the chord is left out for voice leading purposes. Know that the root of the chord is never omitted. If G is the root of this chord, we can represent it with an uppercase Roman numeral 1, and since it is in root position, we can leave out the figured bass.